Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's lecture. My name is Catherine Gibson, and I work as a lecturer in East European and Eurasian Studies at the Johan Institute of Political Studies at the University of Tartu. In this knowledge clip, I will give a brief overview of the key historical developments in the Eastern Neighbourhood region in the 20th century to provide us with important context for understanding developments in the region today. We will cover, firstly, the development of modern nationhood and the collapse of empires. Second, forms of nationhood that emerged in the Eastern Neighbourhood countries after World War I, World War II, the Cold War, and then developments leading up to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. At the beginning of the 20th century, the territories of today's Eastern Neighbourhood countries were divided between three empires: the Romanov Empire, the Habsburg Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. Over the course of the second half of the 19th century, processes of modernization, such as agrarian reforms, abolition of serfdom, urbanization, and industrialization, brought significant changes to the old imperial estate-based societies. National movements arose, which promoted ideas about distinctive national cultures and territories, although these ideas mostly remained confined to elites and intellectuals and did not yet gain mass appeal. Censorship, government restrictions on cultural organizations, and high levels of illiteracy prevented nationalism from becoming a mass movement. The outbreak of World War I caused massive economic crises, food shortages, and social unrest, which catalyzed the disintegration of these three large empires. The collapse of empires facilitated the emergence of new forms of statehood in the region. In the immediate aftermath of the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, nationalist movements in various parts of the Eastern Neighbourhood region declared independence and attempted to establish independent states. These included the Democratic Republic of Georgia, the Belarusian People's Republic, the Ukrainian People's Republic, the Republic of Armenia, the Azerbaijan Democratic Republic, and the Moldovan Democratic Republic. Although these brief attempts at independence were ultimately unsuccessful, they are important historical reference points for national histories and narratives of democratic liberal traditions in the region after 1991. After several years of civil war, the Bolsheviks consolidated control over most of the territory of today's Eastern Neighbourhood regions. In 1922, the Soviet Socialist Republics of Belarus, Ukraine, and Transcaucasia, comprising Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, were established, together with Russia, as the four founding members of the Soviet Union. This marked the start of the complex and tragic Soviet experiment that became one of the characteristic features of the region. In the South Caucasus, artificial border drawing, together with the Soviet policy concerning nationalities, compounded ethnic partitioning, as in the notable case of Nagorno-Karabakh. Meanwhile, in 1936, the Transcaucasian Republic was dissolved, and the constituent republics of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia were elevated to individual union members. It's important to bear in mind, however, that not all of the Eastern Neighbourhood regions were part of the Soviet Union during the interwar years. Parts of today's Western Ukraine and Western Belarus were in the Second Polish Republic. Today's territory of Moldova was part of Greater Romania, except for Transnistria, which was part of the Moldovan Autonomous Republic within Ukraine. In the Soviet Union in the 1920s, economic policies of collectivization and centralized planning were implemented. A policy known as korenizatsiya, or nativization, was introduced to transform non-Russian nationalities into socialist nations, through promoting local communist cadres and promoting the use of local languages in education and cultural spheres. In the 1930s, however, policies towards the republics shifted in favour of Russification. Under Stalin, there were various attempts taken to eliminate dissent, including repressions, deportations, and the man-made famine known as the Holodomor in Ukraine, as well as political purges of intellectuals and elites from 1937 to 1938, a period known as the Great Terror. Timothy Snyder famously used the term bloodlands in his 2010 book to refer to the territories of Eastern Europe which were subject to violence under the Soviets in the 1930s and then occupied by both Nazi Germany and the Soviet Red Army during World War II. The war had a devastating impact on large parts of today's Eastern Neighbourhood region. The eastern front of the war stretched from the northeast to the southeast of Europe and expanded into the South Caucasus with the German advance there in 1942. There were more than 20 million Soviet casualties in the war. Under Nazi German occupation, millions of Jews were murdered during the Holocaust in Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova. Along with the mass deportations from regions on the front line to the Soviet interior, mainly to Central Asia and Siberia, the war dramatically altered the region's population. The war also resulted in several important geopolitical changes to the borders in the region. In 1940, the Soviet Union annexed part of Bessarabia from Romania and established the Moldovan Soviet Republic. In 1945, based on an agreement between American, British, and Soviet leaders at the Yalta Conference, the eastern territories of the Second Polish Republic were transferred to Soviet Ukraine and Soviet Belarus. Additionally, World War II left an important legacy on the politics of memory and conflicting interpretations of history in the Eastern Neighbourhood region. Notably, during the Soviet period, Victory Day military parades were held annually on 9th of May to commemorate victory over Nazi Germany in 1945, a tradition which continued after the collapse of the Soviet Union. In recent years, both Ukraine and Moldova have stopped celebrating 9th of May as an official holiday in recognition that the defeat of Nazi Germany did not mean liberation from Stalinist totalitarianism, and therefore signalling a break with Soviet historical narratives of World War II. Following World War II, a period known as the Cold War began. A metaphorical Iron Curtain descended over Europe, isolating the countries under the communist sphere of influence from the West. These years were characterized by heightened geopolitical tensions between the US and the Soviet Union and their respective allies, known as the Eastern and Western blocs. Both camps competed for supremacy in an arms race, including developing nuclear weapons. Following the death of Stalin in 1953, the Soviet Union entered a period known as the Thaw. Stalin's successor, Khrushchev, relaxed repressions and censorship as part of a policy of de-Stalinization. Under Brezhnev, from the mid-1960s to the 1980s, there were mounting social, economic, and political problems. The failure to reform led Gorbachev to later criticize this period as the era of stagnation. The roots of the collapse of the Soviet Union can be traced back to the reforms of the mid-1980s. When Gorbachev came to power in 1985, he introduced domestic policies of glasnost, meaning openness and transparency, and perestroika, meaning restructuring, to transform Soviet economy and society. During this time, relations with the US also significantly improved. The ethos of glasnost led to more open criticism of the problems in Soviet society, including the protracted war in Afghanistan and the government's handling of the Chernobyl crisis in 1986. Environmental and nationalist movements spread across the Soviet Union. In 1989, pro-independence protests in Georgia were suppressed, and protesters in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania formed a human chain stretching across all three countries, known as the Baltic Way, conveying their growing opposition to the regime. Independence movements in other parts of the communist bloc had a ripple effect. The revolutions of 1989 led the Warsaw Pact countries to overthrow communist rule and declare independence, symbolized by the fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989. In response to these events, Gorbachev decided to allow elections with a multi-party system and to create a presidency for the Soviet Union, thereby beginning a slow process of democratization which contributed to further destabilization. In August 1991, an unsuccessful coup by communist hardliners and military elites tried to overthrow Gorbachev to halt the reforms. Amidst the turmoil in Moscow, many republics proclaimed independence in the following months, leading to the dissolution of the Soviet Union in December 1991. The independent states of Azerbaijan, Armenia, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine were established. At the time, all of these countries joined the Commonwealth of Independent States as a regional intergovernmental organization that was intended to replace the Soviet Union. This brings us to the end of today's lecture. The story of what happened in the Eastern Neighbourhood region after 1991 and the post-communist transition processes will be continued in the next video. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.